What you are about to hear is not a rumor. It is not a theory. At 4:47 in the morning on a cold November Tuesday, federal agents descended on the city of Annapolis, Maryland, and what they found inside that state building would become the single most devastating political corruption case ever dramatized in the history of the American Mid-Atlantic Corridor. $1.5 billion. Laundered, hidden, moved like water through cracks in the floor of a government that was supposed to protect the people it was bleeding. 50 arrests, state officials, law enforcement officers, cartel middlemen in tailored suits who had never once set foot near a border checkpoint. All of it connected, all of it flowing back to one man, one office, one massive and monstrous arrangement with the Gulf Cartel. Stay with us, because how deep this goes is going to make your stomach drop. It was 4:47 a.m. when the first units moved. The streets of Annapolis were hollow. November fog rolled off the Severn River and pressed flat against the brick facades of the historic district. The gas lamps that lined State Circle flickered pale orange in the mist. Not a car moved. Not a dog barked. The Capitol slept like it had no reason to be afraid. Then the silence cracked open. 17 black Suburbans moved simultaneously from 3 different staging points. FBI hostage rescue teams in full tactical kit flowed out of vehicles like dark water. DIA strike units pulled hard right onto Duke of Gloucester Street. ICE Homeland Security Investigations agents, coordinating under a joint federal task force, approached the rear access doors of the Low House office annex from the parking structure below. And a full SWAT element hit the side entrance at the exact same second. No announcement. No hesitation. They breached 4 targets at once. At the Harborview Warehouse Complex in East Baltimore, a logistics firm called Chesapeake Continental Freight, LLC, agents used a battering ram on a steel roll-up door and were immediately met with fluorescent light flooding a space the size of an aircraft hangar. Inside, 43 pallets of shrink-wrapped boxes labeled industrial ceramic tile. 6 agents tore one open. Underneath the ceramic tile samples was 214 kilograms of compressed cocaine bricks stamped with a scorpion emblem, the Gulf Cartel's regional signature. On the other side of the room, behind a false drywall partition that only a thermal scanner would ever detect, agents found something far worse. A superlab. Running. Active. 3 large stainless steel mixing tables. Industrial-grade pill presses. And stacked floor-to-ceiling in heat-sealed Mylar bags, an estimated 2.1 million fentanyl pills, dyed blue, stamped M30, indistinguishable from legitimate prescription oxycodone. 2.1 million pills. Enough to kill the entire population of Baltimore 3 times over. Suspects scrambled. A man in a gray tracksuit grabbed a duffel bag and ran for a fire exit. He made it 6 feet before 2 DIA agents had him on the concrete. The duffel bag split open when it hit the floor. Bundled $100 bills scattered across the warehouse floor like confetti at the world's most violent celebration. Simultaneously, in Baltimore's Fells Point neighborhood, agents hit a Gulf Cartel-linked massage parlor and bar complex called the Meridian Club, a known front operating for 4 years without a single citation from city code enforcement. Not one. Inside, agents found a back office with 3 encrypted burner terminals, a ledger of offshore account routing numbers handwritten in Spanish and English, and underneath a false floor panel, a steel box. Inside the steel box, a USB drive and a laminated access card for a server room in the Low House office annex in Annapolis. Nobody said a word when they found it. But every agent in that room knew. This was not just a cartel house. This was a command post. By 7:30 that morning, a team of FBI cyber forensics analysts was inside a mobile operations unit parked behind the National Guard Armory on Taylor Avenue in Baltimore. Banks of laptops, satellite uplinks. 2 forensic engineers who hadn't slept in 31 hours because they had been briefed on this operation 6 days earlier and had been running pre-analysis on encrypted financial data seized from a prior Gulf Cartel intercept in Texas. They plugged in the USB drive from the Fells Point steel box. The encryption was layered, 4 levels of A's-256, nested like Russian dolls. It took 11 minutes, and a preloaded decryption framework built specifically for Gulf Cartel communication architecture to get through all 4. When the final layer opened, one analyst pushed back from his keyboard and said nothing. He simply turned the laptop screen toward his supervisor. What they were looking at was a network diagram, not drawn by hand, rendered by software, cleanly, professionally, like something a corporate consulting firm would put together for a board presentation. 47 nodes, shell companies, ghost nonprofits, logistics contractors, restaurant chains, agricultural transport firms, a fake renewable energy grant fund, and 3 sham charitable foundations, all of them spokes on a wheel. At the center of the wheel, a single alphanumeric identifier. Operation Blackwater Sound. The analyst's cross referenced that identifier against federal financial surveillance databases and got a hit in under 4 minutes. That identifier, that encrypted digital signature, was tied to a series of authorized wire transfers that originated not from a bank account in Monterey or Guadalajara, but from a Maryland state procurement office. The name on the authorization, Harrison Galt. Deputy Secretary of State Infrastructure and Regional Development, Maryland. 11 years in office. Twice named one of the most effective administrators in the Mid-Atlantic region by a national governance journal. Photographed shaking hands with senators. Photographed cutting ribbons at school openings and bridge dedications. Photographed in one archived image, standing at a podium with a flag behind him, talking about the sacred obligation of public service. Harrison Galt had not been serving the public. He had been serving the Gulf Cartel. The forensic team began pulling thread after thread. What they found was not corruption in the ordinary sense of the word, a bribe here, a falsified contract there. What they found was architecture, deliberate, patient, engineered architecture that had been quietly assembling itself for 7 years. 7 years. Galt had taken a second paycheck, routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Ridge Infrastructure Partners, every single month for 7 years. In exchange, the Gulf Cartel received something that money alone could never buy on the street. Institutional protection. Procurement contracts steered toward cartel-linked logistics companies. State inspection schedules leaked so that convoys carrying tons of narcotics could move through Maryland highway way stations during maintenance windows. Port coordination data, shared with cartel handlers, allowing shipments arriving through Baltimore's waterfront to move without secondary inspection triggers. This is not corruption. It is command-level collusion. This is not negligence. It is engineered treason. And the worst part? The analysts had only cracked the first layer of the financial web. The next phase was already being authorized. At 5:15 a.m., before the sun had fully broken over the Chesapeake, a Federal Joint Operations Command Center went live inside a converted conference facility at Aberdeen Proving Ground. The room was cold with air conditioning and bright with the glow of a 40-foot digital operations display. The map showed Maryland. Then it zoomed out to show the entire eastern seaboard. Then it kept zooming. Red markers pulsed across the map like a second heartbeat. Annapolis, Baltimore, Hagerstown, Frederick, Salisbury, Ocean City, down into northern Virginia, up into southern Pennsylvania, across through Delaware and into South Jersey. 41 active Gulf Cartel operational nodes, safe houses, transit warehouses, money counting houses, stash apartments, fortified cartel mansions, all of them lit up on that screen because Operation Blackwater Sound had identified every single one. Over 1,200 federal agents were activated at 5:30 a.m. FBI, DIA, ICE. These agents from 3 regional divisions, Maryland State Police Federal Liaisons, 41 SWAT elements, a National Guard aviation unit providing Black Hawk surveillance support over the I-95 and I-70 corridors, Coast Guard cutters repositioned off the mouth of the Patapsco River, and 2 U.S. Army intelligence units quietly embedded with the ground teams for communications intercept support. The command was given at precisely 5:47 a.m. Hit everything. All at once. A cartel superlab operating inside a refrigerated food distribution facility outside Hagerstown, taken down in 4 minutes. Agents seized an estimated 800 kilograms of methamphetamine, enough fentanyl to fill 3 cargo vans, and a server rack running encrypted communication channels that the Gulf Cartel used to coordinate shipments across 5 states. A fortified Gulf Cartel mansion in the wooded hills above Ruxton, Maryland, a property that appeared in county records as the home of a retired European businesswoman who hadn't actually existed, breached by a SWAT element and DIA agents simultaneously. 3 armed cartel enforcers attempted to engage. They were subdued before they reached the back staircase. Agents recovered 42 firearms, $11 million in cash sealed in vacuum bags, and a human trafficking transit registry, a handwritten log of 64 individuals moved through that property as part of a migrant smuggling pipeline running from Texas through Baltimore. 64 people. Logged like cargo, a drug tunnel discovered beneath a dry cleaning business on the southern edge of Baltimore, 40 meters long, reinforced concrete, ventilated, with a pulley system for moving narcotics packages, connected to a stash house across the lot. Inside the stash house, agents found 7 individuals in a locked room. They were not cartel members. They were migrants. They had been held there for 9 days. A human trafficking transit hub on the eastern shore, disguised as a seasonal agricultural worker housing facility, taken by ICE and FBI agents working in tandem. 22 individuals rescued. 3 cartel handlers arrested. By noon, 47 of the 50 targeted individuals were in federal custody. The remaining 3 were the subject of active pursuit operations. In 6 hours, the Gulf Cartel's Maryland network had taken more damage than in the previous 6 years combined. The investigators didn't stop when the raids ended. They kept pulling. By late afternoon, federal agents were inside the Low House Annex server room, the room that the access card from the Fells Point steel box had opened. What they found on those servers did not just implicate Harrison Galt. It implicated a system. 12 Maryland State Highway Administration officers, men and women who had been trusted to monitor freight movement and report irregularities, had been on cartel payroll for between 2 and 5 years. They had falsified patrol grid reports. They had called in false maintenance closures at way stations on the nights that cartel convoys moved north from Virginia. They had, on at least 4 documented occasions, radioed ahead to warn cartel transport drivers when federal task force vehicles were operating in their sector. They were not rogue actors. They were a department within a department. A second enforcement structure running parallel to the legitimate one, answering not to the state of Maryland, but to the Gulf Cartel and the man who had opened the door for them. 3 sitting district court judges had accepted payments routed through a sham legal services foundation. In exchange, they had quietly dismissed 4 narcotics possession cases involving known Gulf Cartel distributors, releasing individuals back onto the streets who went on to move product that eventually killed people. 2 members of a state legislative staff office had provided advance notice of proposed legislation that would have increased inspection funding at the Port of Baltimore, giving cartel handlers enough time to temporarily suspend a major shipment cycle before the political scrutiny passed. When federal agents arrested the former deputy director of a state transportation authority at his home in Ellicott City at 6:20 that evening, a man who had served 22 years in public administration, he sat down at his kitchen table and didn't speak for 40 minutes. His wife stood in the hallway. The agents waited. Finally, he said, quietly, that he had told himself it was just one decision. Just once. And then it was twice. And then it was every month for 4 years, and he couldn't find the door out anymore. One of the arresting agents, a 12-year FBI veteran who had spent 6 of those years working public corruption cases, walked out to his vehicle afterward, sat in the driver's seat, and did not start the engine for a long time. The badge and the system behind it would need to be rebuilt from the ground up. Pull back further. Zoom out from Maryland, from Annapolis and Baltimore in the fog off the Severn River, and look at the larger shape of what the Gulf Cartel had constructed here. Blackwater Sound was not a regional operation. It was a node in something continental. The financial forensics team, working through a second night at Aberdeen, traced the shell company network outward across state lines. Chesapeake Continental Freight, the logistics company at the Harborview warehouse, was one of 11 identically structured freight companies operating across the eastern seaboard. All of them used the same Cayman Islands banking architecture. All of them submitted contracts to state and municipal governments through a single management holding company based in Delaware. All of them moved product under freight manifests that listed industrial materials, agricultural equipment, or restaurant supply goods. Per week, at full operational capacity, the network had the documented capability to move an estimated 4 tons of narcotics through the eastern United States without a single automated alert triggering in federal freight monitoring systems. 4 tons. Per week. Because the weigh station operators had been paid. Because the inspection schedules had been leaked. Because Harrison Galt had made sure the machinery of government bent just slightly in the right direction at just the right moments. And it went further still. A file recovered from Galt's office, a file that had been encrypted and stored on a personal device that agents found in a locked drawer behind a framed photograph of his family, contained what federal investigators would later describe in sealed court documents as a long-range planning document. It was a blueprint. Not for one more year of operation, not for one more cycle of narcotic shipments and laundered payments. It was a blueprint for making Maryland a permanent, institutionally protected hub for Gulf Cartel operations along the entire eastern seaboard. Specific proposals for additional procurement steerage. Additional judicial relationships to develop. A proposed expansion of the Shell Company network into Virginia and North Carolina. A section, 6 pages long, on how to accelerate the corruption of Port Authority personnel in Baltimore to allow uninspected container shipments. The system was not simply infiltrated. It was being redesigned, methodically, deliberately, to serve the cartel's future, not just its present. That is what 7 years of patience and one complicit man in a position of institutional authority had quietly built. Here is what all of it cost. Not the $1.5 billion that money can be argued over in courts and clawed back through asset forfeiture proceedings for years. The real cost cannot be recovered in a courtroom. In Baltimore, in 2022, 965 people died of drug overdoses. Many of those deaths involved fentanyl. Some of those fentanyl pills, stamped blue, shaped to look like medicine, moved through networks exactly like the one that was dismantled that November morning. Through warehouses exactly like the one in Harborview, through distribution chains that ran from cartel labs in Mexico, through corrupt logistics infrastructure to street-level dealers, to people who had no idea what they were taking. Each of those 965 deaths was somebody's child, somebody's parent, somebody's oldest friend. In neighborhoods from Cherry Hill to Sandtown Winchester to East Baltimore, the loss didn't look like a statistic. It looked like a bedroom that nobody went into anymore. Power does not always need violence to destroy a community. Sometimes it only needs silence and ambition. A man in a good suit in a well-lit office saying yes to the right phone call and then pretending for 7 years that the consequences had nothing to do with him. Harrison Galt did not sell drugs on a corner. He never touched a pill press or a brick of cocaine. But he held the door open and held it open and held it open, and through that door walked everything that followed. 50 people arrested, $1.5 billion seized or traced. Dozens of law enforcement officers, judges, and administrators implicated in the deepest political corruption dramatized in modern Maryland history. A Gulf Cartel network stretching from Baltimore to the Virginia border to the ports of the Mid-Atlantic, dismantled, at least in this chapter. The Gulf Cartel did not invade Maryland. It was invited in. And it was given a desk, and a budget, and 7 years to make itself at home. If you stayed with this story to the end, tap like so others get the chance to see it too. Comment expose if you believe political corruption and cartel infiltration need to stay in the light, not buried in sealed courtrooms and official silence. The next time someone tells you corruption is just politics, remember the warehouse in Harborview. Remember the 64 names in the transit log. Remember the 2.1 million pills that were almost just another Tuesday's shipment moving through a system that had been quietly redesigned to let them through. Some doors, once open, take a very long time to close.